It is a work of genre fiction. It's a fantasy novel, that leads you to expect that it will perhaps have an emphasis on plot, and indeed there are multiple murders, some of them extremely gruesome. There are plots and political machinations, there is romance, there are explosions, but it's also a book that's interested in asking very broad questions. The broadest question of all: what is a book? How do we make sense of what we read? This is another theme. The book is presented in a format that mimics the Bible, so it's split into chapters and verses. So it's sort of, the form is shouting at you, interpret me, interpret me. I wanted to think about, because we now live in an age, of course, in which that question of what is a book is no longer as obvious a question as it might once have seemed. Is a book an object printed on paper? Is it a continuous stream of data? That question is yet to be resolved satisfactorily. I am the writer of Five Wounds. I'm also credited as the art director. But it's a book that's done in collaboration with Dan Hallett, who is the illustrator, and also with Zoe Sadokierski, who is the designer. So it's very much a collaborative book. And you can almost think of it as working more like a film production than a conventional book production. And in terms of that way of thinking about things, I would be the writer-director of that film project, pseudo-film project, working with those other collaborators. So it's my job not only to write the text, but to try and make sure that all the elements, the visual elements, are collectively contributing, saying the same thing, that they're all coherent and they're all part of the same project. But also it's my job to make sure that Dan is left enough space to work so that he can be inspired and offer his own insights into the material. So it's a sort of balance between giving him direction and actually just staying hands-off and giving him room to be inspired. That's the really important thing for any collaborator. It's certainly not. It's not intended to herald the extinction of the writer, but certainly it's very much starting with the presumption that a book is a collaborative object, is an object that's produced by different people in collaboration. And it seems to me that the more those different collaborators can communicate directly with one another, the more possibilities there are to make that collaboration a meaningful process. So it's not a question of me finishing a manuscript, handing it on to somebody with whom I never communicate directly, who in turn hands it on to somebody else with whom they never communicate directly. It's a question of trying to get an open conversation between all the people who are involved in meaning making. I think the future is in collaboration. But I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? I should say I'm great with collaboration so long as I'm the director. I'm less effective at collaboration when I have to be responding to other people's direction. But as I've said, collaboration is also about discovering things that you didn't know before. I write scripts for Dan for the illustrations. I hand them on to him. I have an idea in my mind about what the picture is going to look like. Indeed, you can think of the process of writing a script as an attempt to describe a picture that doesn't yet exist, which is a peculiar conceptual process. However, I'm always surprised by what Dan actually produces. It's always not quite what I expected. And so the process of collaboration is actually a process of discovery for me. And it seems to me it's precisely, the advantages of it is precisely the things that you cannot predict and cannot control. In advance. And to me, that seems to me to be an incredibly positive way of working. Instead of attempting to minutely control everything, what you actually gain from the process is to do with the loss of control in a way. Yeah, we called it an illuminated novel, referring to the illuminated books of William Blake, which were very much part of the same tradition of thinking about the production of a book as a process that involves images and words in conversation with one another and through the medium of design. But thinking about this broader question of what is a book, that obviously there have been historically different answers to that question. The Gutenberg revolution with the invention of the printed book, and now we're moving into a digital age. But one of the ways, I think, to pose that question in a way that doesn't lead you to sort of just repeat the same answers over and over again is to look at the history and sort of go back through the history and look at the different solutions to that question that have been posed throughout history. So this mode of telling the story, of presenting the story, does draw on manuscript traditions, even though, in actual fact, the form that this book takes would be impossible without digital publishing. So it is a book that's often, in many of the reviews, they said this is a book that is intended as a sort of as an answer to the question of digital publishing. But in fact, this book would be impossible without digital publishing. The process of creating it, of integrating the various elements, is only possible through programs like Photoshop and InDesign. It wouldn't have been possible to produce this book physically 20, 30 years ago, before the advent of desktop publishing. Absolutely, somebody referred to it as an analog iPad. And actually, I think, thinking again about this question of what is a book, I think this book would work fine on an iPad, where the integrity of the page as a unit of design is preserved. It would not work on a Kindle, which treats a book as a continuous stream of data that can be chopped up in a completely arbitrary manner. So this book is heavily invested in the idea that the page is a meaningful unit of design. But any delivery system that respects the integrity of the page is a delivery system with which this book can work. It doesn't have to be a physical object. However, having it as a physical object does give you an extra dimension to all these visual elements, for sure.